All right, let's get started. Welcome again, everyone. My name is Amin Gill, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager for the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension Project. I'd like to start by thanking you all for joining us tonight. This is our 6th open house this year and 20th overall. At tonight's open house, we'll be providing updates and sharing updated plans for restoring parks and natural areas along the future route of the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension. We'll start the event today with a safety moment and a land acknowledgement as usual. You can just skip to the next slide. Okay, here's our safety moment. As you may have seen, construction for the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension project has expanded, which means that trucks, machinery, and equipment are now operating in many areas along the Eglinton Avenue West corridor. Staff are trained to ensure the safe movement of vehicles and equipment in the area. We all have a role to play in safety. Please obey construction signage in the area and cross at designated sidewalks and crosswalks. Exercise caution when traveling and commuting in the area. And on to our land acknowledgement. Let us take a moment to acknowledge that we are on lands that have been and continue to be home to many Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are all treaty people. Many of us has come here as settlers, as immigrants, or involuntarily as part of the transatlantic slave trade in this generation or generations past. We acknowledge the historic and continued impacts of colonization and the need to work towards meaningful reconciliation with the original caretakers of this land. We acknowledge that Metrolinx operates on territories and lands covered by many treaties that affirm and value the right of Indigenous communities, nations, and peoples. We understand the importance of working towards reconciliation with the original caretakers of this land and will conduct business in a manner that is built on a foundation of trust, respect, and collaboration. Right, next slide. Okay, I'd like to also go over some engagement guidelines. As you may have noticed, attendees today will have their videos turned off and microphones muted. Our session does include a question and answer component at the end of the presentation. Some of you have already submitted your questions on the event page. If you do have a question during the presentation, please go to www.metrolinx.com/ECWE_events to get to the event page. The website is listed on the page here. At the bottom of that page, you'll see a Slido where you can submit your questions. As a reminder, we'll prioritize answering questions today that are related to the content being presented tonight. Those questions that are unrelated or that we don't get to tonight will be answered and posted to the event page within 14 business days. So please do check back there for updates in the coming days. This event is being closed captioned and French translation is available upon request. I also do, before we get started, I want to say that this open house tonight is focused solely on the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension project, and specifically the restoration and environmental impacts in the area. But we do acknowledge that there are many other transit projects that Metrolinx is undertaking that are under construction and others that are going through assessment phases to ensure that any questions unrelated to the content tonight is answered. Our contact us slide at the end of the presentation will provide several ways for you to get in touch with us. So today we will share elevated guideway construction updates, plans to mitigate potential impacts, restoration planning updates, and immersive experience tools. The first half will provide the elevated guideway construction updates and an overview, and the second half will be dedicated to a Q&A section. So I'd like to introduce you to our panel today. I've introduced myself. I'm Amin Gill. I'm the Community Engagement Manager. I've got with me today Dave Restivo, who's a lead arborist with Dillon Consulting, Mihal Killeen, who is the Technical Design Manager with Arup, and Peter Smith, who's the lead landscape architect with DITA. All right, we'll go through a brief overview of the project. The project is a 9.2 kilometer new rapid transit line. It will extend the Eglinton Crosstown project west toward Renforth with 7 new stations, 5 connections to other transit options, including the Up Express, Kitchener GO Train, GO Transit, TTC, and MyWay buses. There will be 37,500 more people within walking distance to transit and 23,600 more jobs within walking distance. I'll hand it over here to Mihal, who will take us through the construction timeline.
Thank you, Aman. So this is an overview, a kind of high-level overview of the construction timeline for the project. We see here there's 4 contracts, 3 advanced contracts, and 1 final contract. The advanced contracts are basically 2 tunnels, the first of which goes from Renford Station all the way to Scarlett, so it's approximately 6 kilometers in length. The second tunnel goes from just to the east of Jane Street all the way to Mount Dennis, approximately 500 meters long. And these are connected by an elevated guideway in the Eglinton Flat section. You can think of these advanced contracts as constructing the shell, and the final contract constructs all of the stations, the track work, and all of the systems. If you look at the bottom half of the screen, you'll see a timeline. So tunneling is well underway for the first contract. Approximately over 4 kilometers of that 6 kilometers is complete, and hoping to commence these other 2 contracts very shortly. And we can see here then for that SRS, or that stations contract, design will commence next year, and aiming to conclude that with opening for operation in 2031. Thanks, Aman. Oh, I think you're still on mute, Aman.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sorry. So next couple of slides will go through mitigating potential impacts. Daniel, if you don't mind, next slide. So this is what we've heard to date. Throughout the project, we have shared information and received fantastic insights from the public through our online surveys, open houses, conversations through pop-ups, and door-to-door canvassing, and through community and stakeholder meetings and social media. Here are some of the key things we've heard. We've heard that public community spaces are a priority for use surrounding the guideway, that environmental and wildlife impacts should be considered and mitigated as much as possible, and to reduce tree removals and replant affected areas as much as possible. This input has been received and is being considered as the project moves into the design phase. So Metrolinx is committed to minimizing the project impacts through design, construction, and operation by integrating ways to reduce or mitigate the impact on the environment through design, ensuring Metrolinx contractors adhere to specific requirements and expectations to mitigate construction impact during the construction phase, and that regular maintenance and monitoring is taking place during operation. Next slide. Yeah, we'd also like to share with you some best practices, including effective hoarding and signage placement to facilitate detours, thoughtful site plans to ensure business continuity, responding to neighborhood concerns to resolve reasonable complaints in a timely manner, traffic analysis and modeling to assess impacts and mitigations for all projects in the area, identifying and communicating public or private parking impacts well in advance, and surveying businesses so programs can be tailored to meet their needs. Community safety is our priority. So some of the ways we achieve this is through our overall requirements, but also site-specific requirements. I'll maybe read through some of them. Our overall requirements include contractors adhering to all provincial safety legislation and city bylaws, detailed construction and traffic management plans, along with safety plans that have been shared with Metrolinx in the city for review and sign-off. The contractor will have to develop and implement noise and vibration plans in compliance with provincial standards. We've got flag persons and paid duty officers directing traffic where needed, and all construction impacts are shared with the community in advance via construction liaison committee meetings, community notices, neighborhood canvassing, etc. Site-specific requirements include safe pedestrian access to be maintained, any temporary sidewalk closures or detours, having safety barriers, clear detour signage, and wayfinding so that you can still get to where you need to go safely. During advanced utility work phases, fencing will be installed to ensure safety around the work zone. During station construction phase, construction hoarding will be installed. It will be visually appealing and well lit. The designs and imagery will be tailored to reflect the local community, and it will include wayfinding and safety information, again, so you can get to where you need to go safely, and access for emergency services will be maintained.
Thanks, Aman. So yeah, this slide basically talks about the impact that the parks, and just to emphasize that we do know the parks are quite important, and you know, all of these parks will be able to be accessed at all times during construction. That is a contractual requirement. So it's important just to note that. And maybe some examples of this is the Fergie Brown Park Access Road. So as I say, it is a contract requirement that a new Fergie Brown Park is constructed before the old Fergie Brown Park Access Road is decommissioned. Or another example is the commitment to constructing a cycle track along the south side of Eglinton between Jane and Black Creek. So just to emphasize the importance of these parks and that the access will be maintained at all times. Next slide, please. And the other aspect to consider is the noise and vibration associated with construction. So it's very important that when the contractors are working on this, that excessive noise and vibration is not generated. To prevent this, we have set contractual limits, and Metrolinx have also set up a helpline for anybody that wants to raise concerns. In addition to these initiatives, we're also looking, in addition to these initiatives, we also have carried out an acoustic study and hope to share the results of this with you so you can hear for yourself and judge for yourself what it will sound like in operation. And the result of this will be able to inform additional mitigation such as rail dampeners or noise walls in future. Next slide, please. So this slide, it talks about minimizing disruption to traffic and to users. So this is a very important consideration for Metrolinx in terms of their projects. And by and large, we can say that works along the ECWE will be off Eglinton Avenue, trying to minimize disruption to users. In the event that works do have to come onto Eglinton Avenue, so for example, if you're doing some utility works or if you're doing an approach ramp near Scarlet Road, you may have to work in the roadway. In this case, the contractor will be required to submit a traffic control plan to the city for their review and approval. And this plan will contain information such as how many lanes they will be taken up, how long the works would be, safe access points. So as we say, safety is at the forefront here, and all of these plans are developed in close collaboration with City of Toronto. Thanks, Aman.
Thanks, Michal. I'm going to go through how we're going to mitigate impacts to natural features. First, I'm going to speak to the Humber River. There are a number of measures that will be implemented to protect the Humber River and other surface water drainage features and wetlands. The first thing is really at the design stage. We're not going to be in the river channel itself. The bridge is going to span the river, and so there's not going to be any direct impacts in channel. And then we install construction fencing around the perimeter of the construction site, and that's to prevent the encroachment of construction vehicles and construction workers into the adjacent natural features. As a design criteria, we retain and protect as much of the natural vegetation as possible. This has many functions. It provides stability and reduces the risk of erosion, and it acts as a buffer to these water features. We'll implement stormwater management practices to maintain the post-construction flow and water retention to surface water features and wetlands to match what is happening prior to construction. Erosion sediment control plans will also be implemented, and this prevents the release of sedimentation to these receiving water bodies. And we have a consultation with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, or DFO, and they provided a letter of advice, which includes a number of things to protect and avoid effects to fish and fish habitat, including best management practices, conducting work in the dry, and monitoring programs for sedimentation and the need to prepare a spill response plan. Next slide. Protecting wildlife is also a priority. And so things like implementing timing restrictions if you're going to be disturbing natural features or wildlife habitat, such as bird nesting window, vegetation removal restrictions. So between, for example, April 1st and August 31st, there won't be any tree removal within that habitat. We also install things like bat habitat structures, and this is in accordance with an Endangered Species Act permit. And that is to kind of supplement the habitat that might be removed in the woodland feature. And so it acts as a mitigation measure there. We fence the work area, as I said before, and that's not only to prevent encroachment out, but it's also to prevent wildlife from coming in the construction zone. But in the event that that does happen, we have qualified biologists or personnel that will or have the qualification to handle wildlife and move them out. First and foremost, we allow wildlife to egress the construction site on their own. But if they're, for example, injured or they're not leaving the site, these individuals are qualified to handle them and move them to an appropriate habitat. Next slide. So ways in which we manage vegetation and tree impacts. So we first and foremost follow the Metrolinx vegetation guide, and that identifies the data that we need for arborist reports. It identifies the number of tree and vegetation plantings we need to offset any removals in natural features or landscape areas. These are areas affected by construction. It also recommends healthy soil specs, seed mixes, and plant selection. Other things we do is we consult with municipalities and local conservation authorities and abide by environmental regulations and bylaws. And we provide additional compensation for designated natural features. And so, it's not a one-to-one, we're providing a greater number of vegetation and trees to go back onto the landscape. And then we also ensure that we site our work outside of things like sensitive wetland features. Next slide. So the ways in which we go about this, we collect an inventory of natural features and trees. We collect information like their species, condition, and we prepare plans and evaluate which vegetation and trees need to be removed versus which can be retained. We develop these tree protection plans and other mitigation measures following the city and TRCA guidelines. And then we prescribe things like removal of hazard trees, which could impact person or property, and control of things like invasive species. And those are species that are non-native and have a harmful effect on the natural ecosystem by decreasing biodiversity, for example. And then in our restoration plans, this is a real opportunity for the project. So we are going to be affecting areas, and these are areas that have been disturbed in the recent past. They have a high composition of non-native invasive species. They have a lot of other disturbances that have gone on. The soils in these areas is a lot of fill material and is poor plant growth medium. And there is generally low biodiversity compared to other areas in the natural heritage system that haven't been as affected. And so the real opportunity here is to go into not only the areas that we affect during construction temporarily and restore those, but go to the adjacent lands and do additional things to restore those areas, to increase biodiversity, increase the number of trees in these areas, overall improve the natural heritage system. Next slide. So we do have compensation formulas that we use. So for example, in designated natural areas, we use the TRCA's protocol. And for example, for every 1 hectare of woodland that we would be removing, we would have to replace potentially 3 hectares of replacement vegetation. And similarly, the City of Toronto has tree bylaws. And so if in areas that are regulated by the city, for example, a private area, we would replace all private trees that were removed over 30 centimeters diameter at a 3-to-1 ratio, all park trees, all street trees at a 3-to-1 ratio, and ravine and natural feature protection areas, that would be another area-based compensation approach. Okay, next slide. Peter?
Thank you, Dave. Next slide, please. Metrolinx is committed to repairing and restoring, replacing all of the landscapes which are impacted by this project. It's a big project, a large infrastructure project, and a major construction project. And there will be impacts to local landscapes, but these will be all restored. And they will be restored to, as Dave mentions, to even better condition than they are now. What is landscape restoration? Restoration is quite a technical undertaking and very involved undertaking that requires a very thorough knowledge of soils and moisture and local weather conditions and of course native plants and plant communities. I would like to stress that rather than a single act of planting a lot of plants, landscape restoration is a process, and it can take many years of careful management, careful maintenance, monitoring, and continual kind of upgrades to the vegetation base. Eventually, it will become self-sustaining and very beautiful. Next slide. So what are the 4 major components of successful landscape restoration? Number one is very important, is healthy soil. Metrolinx is developing criteria and strategies for either repairing existing soil on site or importing new soil, and developing very high standards for all of these activities. In all likelihood, the soil that will be brought in or prepared on site will be far better than what's out there now. We all know that Eglinton Avenue West was actually constructed in 1970 on a landfill causeway with a lot of fill and probably at the time not very good topsoil. So the soil, when we leave the site, will be even better than what's there now. We use native plants. Why do we use native plants? Because they are hardy, they are self-sustaining, and they attract or set the context for wildlife habitat, which is superior to other kinds of vegetation. Designed for diversity. There are a number of different ecological zones on the ECWE site, and each of them requires a different design approach in order to ensure sustainability and ensure long-term viability. And as I mentioned earlier, it's essential to monitor and maintain these landscapes over time, over a good number of years, in fact, and it requires very active and careful attention to detail and to the health and continuity of the plant base. And the image on the right there indicates something of what we would hope to achieve, minus the pond. Next slide. So what does it look like over time? Well, year one, there's a million plants are put in, very high density plants. But by year 3, it's beginning to look very green and very lush, not big plants at this point in time. It's not until the year 10 or 15 years that the plants begin to grow, and the woody plants in particular begin to provide shape and shade and context for for the emerging landscape. Next slide. Metrolinx is undertaking a landscape restoration plan that's underway right now. It will be it's scheduled to be complete in sometime next June. What is the plan and the purpose? It's to set the direction for detailed landscape design along the alignment, and will cover all aspects of the ECWE, including Eglinton Flats and the areas associated with the elevated guideway, but also all the city boulevards and all of the lands surrounding the ancillary buildings and the stations. So it's a very big project. It's one of the purposes is to ensure a consistent line-wide approach so that there is an identity to the ECWE project. Certainly, one of the purposes is to engage directly with the community, with community stakeholders, and to engage with city and TRCA stakeholders in order that we understand their requirements and they understand our issues and challenges. And when the restoration plan is complete, it will have been approved and vetted by the key stakeholders. And that provides a certain design certainty so that we know what's going to come out of this process, and also the community knows what's going to come out of this process. We'll all understand the process and have expectations that are realistic and implementable. Next slide. That's just a couple of views of the elevated guideway and the kinds of restoration that would be associated with it. North of the guideway, of course, any lands that are impacted by construction will be restored and will become even better than what's out there now, eventually. Next slide. The lands directly underneath the elevated guideway are challenging, without doubt. There is reduced sunlight and reduced rainfall in these landscapes, which means that they're going to be quite kind of unique as well as challenging. There are plants that will survive under these conditions, and we will optimize their use. There may also be areas where vegetation cannot be supported, and those areas will be developed with beach stone that's laid out in a what we call a dry creek pattern, which means that it's fully integrated with the vegetation on either side. This is still under development. We're still working with this, but the intention is to develop landscapes that are cohesive, integrated, and fully recognizable as designed landscapes. The last thing we want to do is leave this as unkept lands and unmaintained lands. They're highly visible and highly important to the project. Next slide. And then, of course, the city boulevard along Eglinton Avenue West. The image on the left shows the existing, and we will be trying to replace that to the extent possible. Sidewalks, multi-use pathways, planted green boulevards. The street trees along Eglinton are now very important and will continue to be very important in the future when the guideway is built. Not only to help create a pedestrian environment which is comfortable and at a pedestrian scale, but also to mitigate views of the elevated guideway from the street. Next slide. We're just going to take a quick run along the elevated guideway. We're starting at Scarlett with the Humber River. And you can see this is the amount of landscape that we understand will be restored, not only north of the elevated guideway, but also along the Eglinton Avenue Boulevard. It's interesting, I think, to examine this air photo and understand that there is a lot of vegetation in the Eglinton Flats area that will not be impacted. Certainly nothing on the south side and much of the existing vegetation north of Eglinton Avenue. Next slide. This is the section from Emmett Avenue to Jane Street, showing the new Scarlet station, the elevated station at Jane Street. This is the south end of Eglinton Flats. It is a bit challenging because the existing vegetation is not that extensive in this area. We will be undertaking specialized design procedures here in order to develop a landscape which serves to effectively screen the elevated guideway from the Eglinton Flats area. And next slide. This shows Jane Street to Piran Park. Part of Piran Park will be used as a construction laydown area, and that will be fully restored to an even better condition than it is now. And with collaboration with the public and with various stakeholders, there may even be additional enhancements in this area to complement the existing park and support community aspirations in this area. Next slide. This is a rendering depicting all three landscapes that we've just been talking about. From the left, we see the landscapes north of the elevated guideway, which will be restored fully and completely, and will be of a higher quality vegetation than the existing. Underneath the guideway is that challenging zone that doesn't receive sunlight or light. We will endeavor to plant as much vegetation as possible and supplement that with areas of beach stone, which in and of themselves can also be attractive. Shrubs between the sidewalk and the elevated guideway and the city boulevard with the sidewalk, and street trees in the grass boulevard. So we're optimistic. We're looking forward to continuing to develop the restoration plan and looking forward to sharing it with the community at some point in the very near future. Thank you, and I believe it's back to Micheál.
Thank you very much, Peter. So kind of following on from the work that Peter and our team are doing on the restoration plan, we're also developing some tools to help you visualize and hear what the guideway sounds like. And although we don't have the acoustic part of this ready for today, that'll be a future open house, we did want to share some of these tools with you. So next slide, please. Thank you very much. So in this slide, we see basically a bird's eye view of the Eglinton Flats. So in the left-hand side, we have the Humber River and Scarlet Road, and all the way over to the right in the eastern part of this image, we have Piran Park. And you'll notice that there's 7 locations. So starting in the left with One Rich View, the Humber River, Scarlet Road, all the way over to Piran Park. And we selected these as giving a kind of a representative area. So some are in playing pitches, some are more residential, some are by the river, and some are on roads. And at each of these locations, we've chosen a tool to help you visualize, or as I say, hear what the guideway sounds like. So the first of these, I should mention, it's the red dashed line. And this is an aerial animation that we captured with a drone. And using this footage, then we're able to superimpose what the guideway looks like. So we'll look at that in a moment. The second one that we have, it's kind of shown by these blue eyeballs. These are verified photographic views. And what these are is basically a time montage. So it shows you what the guideway or what this location looks like now, what it looks like 5 years after construction, and what it looks like 30 years after construction. So the purpose of these locations is to show you how restoration develops over time. And finally, you'll notice some images in yellow with a little film and an audio beside it. And these are the locations that we propose to have this kind of film and acoustic location. So we'll show you 2 of these today. And as I say, in future, hope to layer on what that audio sounds like. So next slide, please. Thank you, Daniel. So this is the aerial animation. So we're starting here on Scarlet Road and we're going to travel from west all the way to east. But see here, this is Scarlet Portal, so it's where the underground tunnels enter that first contract daylight, and the alignment starts to rise from the ground. It takes over a bit of Eglinton, and you see Eglinton is diverted here. What we see now in the picture is Scarlet Station, and if you look closely, you'll see a green roof. So this helps reduce environmental pollutants, and it also helps us to lower energy costs. This is another view just at Scarlet Station. We can see that green roof there again. So looking back, this view will now show us what the Humber River looks like. And in order to minimize the impact on the river and aquatic life, there's a minimum of a 7.3 meter setback for the piers, so no piers in the river. This image here, it shows us the playing pitches. So these are the parking lots. We know this is a very important amenity and access is maintained at all times. The dashed line here is basically showing the extent of construction. We've pushed it as far south as possible in order to minimize the tree removals and also introduce incentives into the contract so that the contractors, when they're working, will be incentivized and compensated for saving more trees. As you move here now along Jane Street, very shortly you'll see where our cycle track starts. So the cycle track basically starts at Jane Street and goes all the way to Black Creek Drive. And the purpose of that is that the MUP, which goes to Piran Park at the moment, will be disconnected during construction. So we have to put an alternative cycling route in place, and we believe this offers better connectivity for the cyclists. You'll also note it highlighted is this new upgraded Fergie Brown Park access road. And as mentioned earlier, this is to be constructed first before the existing road can be decommissioned. And finally, we have a view looking back here on Piran Park and looking west. So that's our early animation just to show some key features of this project. Thanks, Daniel. The next thing that we're going to speak about is these time montage photographs. So as we said, this is basically the restoration over time. So how do we predict what the trees and what the vegetation looks like? So we've consulted with our arborists and our landscape architects, and we've looked in terms of what tree species grow and what's the rate of that growth. And this allowed us to predict what the trees are like after 5 years and also after 30 years. And we then take this information and we're able to update our information, our baseline information that we see in the field. So let's look at some examples of these. I think the first one on the next slide is taken just across from Piran Park. So we're standing on Eglinton looking west, and this is basically the existing MUP that you have taken in July this year. So the next slide will show us what it looks like after 5 years. And we can see here the vegetation is starting to take hold. These street trees aren't fully grown, but they're starting to screen the portal. And if you go to the next slide again, please, we see that after 30 years, this vegetation is fully mature and it's serving its function to screen this portal. And you can actually, in actual fact, it's very difficult to see Jane Station from this view. So another location is Piran Park itself. And Piran Park, this is taken at the moment so close to the baseball diamond. So during construction, we have to occupy some of this part, and the next slide will show you that some of these trees will be removed. But long term, we will be restoring this park, and after 30 years, we can see that these trees grow back. And as Peter mentioned, we would love to hear kind of feedback in terms of if there's enhancements or any kind of changes we can adopt for the restoration in this park. But the plan is, that ultimately, long term, you will not be able to see the portal or the project from here, that it will be restored to its original condition. Next slide, please, Daniel. I think the next location we're going to is Eglinton Flats playing pitches. So this is the radio antenna that we see just looking due south. And the next slide will show us what it's like when the Jane Station comes here and you have an LRV traveling. So after 5 years, we know that the vegetation is still growing back. But after 30 years, we can see that long term, we can see here, yes, thank you, long term, we can see that the superstructure itself, so the deck and the piers should be camouflaged and covered by these trees. And what's visible is kind of the upper platform of that station and the LRVs travelling. Thanks, Daniel. I think there's one last location, and that's at Scarlet Road. So we're standing here now just to the south side of Scarlet Road beside this bike dock on the Humber Trail. And this is current construction. You can see some of the fast fencing associated with the works at the moment. And in 30 years' time, the next image will help you visualize what the station looks like here. So the station will span across Scarlet Road, and if you look closely, you'll see that the main entrance to the station and the station itself is located just west of Scarlet Road and on the north side of Eglinton Avenue. So these are kind of our time montages showing what the restoration looks like over time. And then we just wanted to show you kind of two videos. So as I mentioned, they're without audio at the moment, but just to give you an idea what we're working on and can share with you in future. This is taken outside Wondrous Tube. Thanks, Daniel. And so we jump straight to the operational one for this rather than having 5 years. So this is the station that we have here. And in a moment, we'll see a train traveling from the east heading west. And so the train itself, the length of that train, the characteristics, the speed at which it enters the station, and the duration which it pauses at the station are all kind of calibrated. So this is actually the timing that will happen and the speed it will travel at. And as I say at the moment, we're just calibrating those acoustic recordings that we have. And the aim is to introduce it and sync it up with this film so you can judge for yourself what it looks and sounds like. Thanks, Daniel. I think we'll have a look at one more location, and that'll bring us to the cricket pitch in Fergie Brown Park. Thanks very much. So this is the bowling line that you have in Fergie Brown Park. And after 5 years, we can see here that some of the vegetation, it won't have fully taken hold. So in a moment, we'll see a train traveling from Jane Station, and it's heading east and it's traveling down the approach ramp and into Jane Portal itself. And you can see some of the retaining wall structure in the background. And in a moment, we'll see another train. Again, the length of this train and the speed of this train is simulated to match what it will actually be. That's heading west towards Jane Station itself. And I think just in a moment we'll see, yes, thank you. This is what the vegetation will look like when it fully takes hold, as I say, after 30 years. So the intention here is that it will be totally visually screened when you're on these Fergie Brown Park pitches. So thank you very much. And yeah, look forward to bringing you a further update on this with the acoustics introduced. Thanks, Daniel.
All right, so what's next? So in late 2023, we can expect construction works related to tree removals, mobilization at the Jane Portal site, and cycle track work along Eglinton Avenue. After that, there will be an open house in early next year to provide an update on Renforth. Sorry, no, this one is in December. We'll have an open house in December to provide an update on the Renforth to Scarlet tunneling work that's happening right now. And we'll continue to engage the community throughout the winter, and there are plans to follow up with another open house in January to introduce restoration. A more detailed plan and more immersive tools, as Michal has mentioned. Construction of the Jane Portal, including piling, excavation, grading, and concrete works, will take place in early 2024. And that's what we've got for you now. Community engagement will continue through all of these works. We can move on to our question and answer section now. We've got a list of panelists here who will help us answer some questions today. We've got our presenters, Dave, Michal, and Peter. And joining us also, we've got Abbas Ali, who's the manager, the ECWE Sponsors Office, Gretel Green, who's the Restoration Environmental Programs and Assessment representative, Tennyson Snelling, who's the environmental project manager, and Deanne Mighton, who is the design manager. Right, and with that, I will move on to our first question, which is, when will this project be completed? I'll hand it over to you, Abbas.
Thank you, Amin. Hello, everyone. Appreciate all of you joining tonight. And it's a great question. It speaks to the excitement from the community to have this project up and running as soon as possible. We also feel that we want this project to be completed as soon as possible, and Metrolinx is committed to do that. Currently, the targeted completion date is 2031. However, as construction progresses and as procurement continues, as the contractors come on board, we'll have a bit more information in regards to the exact opening day. just to kind of speak to what we're doing to ensure that this project is delivered as fast as possible. One of the reasons why we've divided the project into several contracts is exactly that. It's to deliver the project faster. Dividing the project into smaller contracts allows there to be capacity in the market to make sure that the projects are delivered quickly and efficiently. It is a complex and transformational project, as many other rapid transit projects are that we're working on. But we want to ensure that when the project and when the rapid transit service is open for use for customers, it is safe and it's reliable. So we're committed to do that, and we'll continue to work towards making this a reality as soon as possible.
Great, thank you, Abbas. Move on to our next question. Why don't you elevate the entirety of the project for cost effectiveness and great views that an elevated project brings? That I will hand over to Abbas or Miho.
Yeah, I'll get that response started. As many of us are aware, especially those living and working in and around this area of Toronto, there's been many discussions around how to deliver rapid transit along this corridor, along Eglinton West, and Metrolinx is now moving forward with this project announced in 2019, which identified an alignment that includes both underground and elevated sections. When we're deciding whether to go above ground or underground, complex questions with many feelings and opinions and expert opinions about it. But they consider a lot of various factors, including environmental considerations, costs, integration with other transit services in and around the area, impacts to the community, and most important of all, deliverability and operating it, right? So it's important that all of those are considered, considering that each project is unique. So we are elevating the Eglinton Crosstown West extension across the Humber River, and that really provides the best results, balancing the various factors that I noted. The area around Eglinton Avenue West and between Scarlett and Jane is identified as a floodplain zone, and it has experienced historic, high levels of flooding over the years. So it definitely poses challenges in building underground infrastructure in this area. So essentially, we've landed at an alignment that kind of balances these considerations and provides kind of that optimal alignment, and at the same time ensures that we're able to provide that best network connectivity and travel experience for people living in and around the area and also traveling through the corridor.
Thanks for that, Abbas. I think this next one is also for you. Will you be using the same tunnel making machine for the small tunnel connecting to Mount Dennis Station or a different method?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Currently the intention is not to use the same TBM machine at at the second tunnel. However, it is that section, the tunnel between east of Jane connecting into Mount Dennis Station is currently in procurement. So it will be up to the contractor on exactly how that is delivered. But we're definitely working with the contractor to ensure that community impacts are minimized, and we've ensured that especially the site impacts at Perrin Park are limited and contained to the best possible way.
Yep. Okay, thank you. This next one also for you. When will you be doing the bridge around Eglinton Flats Park?
Okay, so Yeah, I think this one refers to the elevated guideway. So again, we are looking to, as Amin noted, in kind of what's coming up next. Some early works are starting along the corridor. However, the elevated guideway is still in procurement. So the exact timing of when construction will start is up to the contractor, and as that information becomes available, we will definitely relay that with the community as part of our ongoing community engagement.
Right, next one's for you, Deanne. Is the Mount Dennis station connected to the GO, or will it be like Bloor GO where we need to cross the road?
Thanks, Oman. The Mount Dennis station is connected. You can see it there today if you go into the No Frills parking lot right at Black Creek and Eglinton, you will be able to make the connection within the integrated station.
Okay, thank you. Next question for you, Mihal. The exposed rail in Ottawa routinely has issues due to exposure to severe weather. How will you protect against this, or why isn't the whole ECWE being built below grade?
Great, thank you, man. So I think maybe just a question about kind of below grade. Abbas gave a very good answer to that one. I think, there's a lot of factors to consider, as Peter mentioned, even about the landscaping. The weather is an important consideration, and I believe the winters are a lot harsher in Ottawa compared to Toronto, so that's one factor that would feed into. And then I think the maintenance strategy that's developed would be kind of appropriate for Toronto. So in terms of kind of running regular shuttles and making sure that the snow is cleared, that would be adopted for the elevated guideway, just to make sure that it's running smoothly and running at all times.
Okay, thank you, Mihal.
Thanks.
Let's get back to the page. Give me a second. Okay, our next question is over to Abbas. Why is it not going further into Mississauga? It hits the border at Renforth. Could there be an additional stop added perhaps at Centennial Park?
Yeah, thanks for that question. One of the key objectives of the ECWE is to connect between the city of Toronto and city of Mississauga, and Renford Station is kind of seen as that kind of connecting point, especially due to the existing MyWay BRT. And one of the, we do think that this ECWE will kind of provide that missing link, right, between Mount Dennis, which is the end of the ECLRT, connecting into this bus rapid transit in the city of Mississauga. That is currently the scope of this project, with the stations as included as part of the project that was announced in 2019. Future extensions are continuously, being considered and studied, and as those kind of potential extensions move forward, the community will be informed. But thank you for the question, and that will definitely be considered in terms of how to further connect into the city of Mississauga.
Thank you, Abbas. Next question for you, Mihal. Won't the elevated guideway be noisy?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think partially because, in terms of like the level of noise that we each interpret it, it's somewhat subjective. So what's noisy to one person mightn't be necessarily noisy to another. I think what we could say, maybe to answer the first part of that, is that hopefully this kind of acoustic study that we're putting together will allow people to judge for themselves and objectively see what the noise of the guideway will be like during operation. Further with that, then, based on those studies that we do, there are kind of mitigations that you can introduce. So things like rail dampeners or noise walls can reduce down the noise impact of stations if that's required. And I think the third thing that Metrolinx have done too is that they have procured vehicles with a guaranteed maximum noise level. So if you produce a very high spec vehicle or train from the beginning, that helps quite a lot in terms of your noise that's generated from it. So they're probably the three things I could say to that.
Thanks, Mihal. We have a question about trees for you, Gretel. What do you do with trees after you cut them down? You're on mute.
Classic. We have a vegetation guideline that clearly outlines our commitments with Metrolinx and what we do with trees for end use. We work closely with the conservation authorities and our municipal partners to try to repurpose the trees we need to remove in a sustainable way. Native woody species may be shared with Indigenous communities and nations if they're interested, or sent to conservation areas for restoration and habitat creation projects. We send a number of our trees down to Tommy Thompson or Brock Road to create different habitats for different animals, or to help with watercourse enhancements. Sometimes the wood is donated to local communities for local art and habitat restoration projects. We're open to suggestions for possible reuse in your community. If your local group is interested, let us know. We're also looking to develop partnerships with local colleges for woodworking programs. Oftentimes with invasive species, we have to dispose of them properly. So that usually results in mulching them on site and using that as tree protection for roots or as part of our erosion and sediment controls. And when we can't find any other uses, sometimes we cut them up and give them away for firewood giveaways for the local community. Thanks.
Thank you, Gretel. All right, next question. It's about the Humber River. For you, Tennyson, how will the elevated guideway impact the Humber River?
Yeah, thanks, Amin. So I think Michal actually touched on this a little bit during the presentation. The intent with the crossing over the Humber River is to span the river on either side. So we will be installing piers that are going to support a bridge-like structure across the Humber. The intent of that is to make sure that we're not actually doing any construction in the water channel and preventing any impacts there. I know Dave also mentioned on our consultation with the DFO, or Fisheries and Oceans Canada, just to make sure that we are getting some advice and consulting with the appropriate agencies and being able to cross over the river. We will also be expecting our contractor to develop some plans during construction to make sure that any of the construction works taking place won't actually impact the river. So things like erosion and sediment control plans, spill response plans in case there's an accident and there is some sort of spill that's close to the Humber. We're going to make sure that we have all of these plans developed and vetted not only by us, but by our project partners and stakeholders like the TRCA to make sure that we're doing our best to prevent any impacts to the Humber at all.
Okay, thank you, Tennyson. The next question also for Gretel or Tennyson. If transit is supposed to be sustainable, then why are you reducing tree cover while you build it?
Hi. So that's a great question. And so I think, we have some commitments. Our vegetation guideline is strongly worded to ensure that we are removing, we're avoiding impacts as much as possible. And while, we know that the Eglinton Crosstown West Extension, it's going to have significant positive impacts on sustainability by reducing our yearly greenhouse gas emissions, by reducing the number of vehicles on the road, by making it convenient for people to choose transit. And I believe in that strongly. It's unfortunate and it really hurts me in my heart, as most people here would know, that, we are going to have to remove trees to make room for that transit, especially in cities that are built up like Toronto, where this is where we have to put the trees. As I've said already, we have a guideline that outlines our commitments around replacing the trees we remove from the landscape. Our practice is to foremost minimize the number of trees that are to be removed, and proceed to plant more trees than remove as we deliver greener travel options across the city. As design progresses, we are in the process of engaging and working with Indigenous communities and nations, municipal and community partners on plans to restore lands after construction, as Peter and Michael and his team really showed, and I hope, made you feel a little better about what it's going to look like later as we build that up. And we're looking to work with you and hear from you about that. We're engaging with our Indigenous communities and, as people said before, our partners, the City of Toronto and TRCA, to identify restoration locations, ensuring more trees are planted than removed, as you saw in those slides as well, as we build this transit. We're looking to plant as many of these trees and shrubs directly in the impacted areas, and then the rest of them along Eglinton and adjacent areas. And the remainders, as our vegetation guideline requires, for replacement on the landscape in the same subwatershed or watershed. And that is to mitigate the ecological function of the area that we're impacting. Sorry, long answer.
Right, no worries. Thanks, Gretel. Next question I've got for Dave. After trees and shrubs are planted, how often will they be watered to ensure the vegetation is healthy and grows well in the years to come? Climate change, I find, has created inconsistent rainfall patterns.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And whoever posed that question understands planting plans, because the most important thing, one of the most important things after you put plants in the ground, and assuming you're putting them in the right soil and all of that, is the maintenance and tending for those plants. And so yes, we do have programs in place to water, and they are escalated when you have a period of drought. So there, it's not as if, you know, you're planting on day, or sorry, you're watering on day 1, 3, and 5. You're responding to the weather that's happening, and if you have periods of drought, you're watering more. And so that's one way in which we tend to plant. And really that critical time is the first weeks and months, and perhaps first and second growing season after you put plants in. That's the critical time when you need, you know, plants are experiencing transplant shock and you want to get them established. And so, yeah, watering is very important. So we do have a comprehensive approach to watering.
Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
Next question for Abbas. Shouldn't you worry about getting the tremendously delayed and over budget Eglinton Crosstown line running before thinking about line extensions? It's taken 12 years to build the crosstown and it's still not running. I have no faith in Metrolinx to produce effective and efficient transit.
Thanks, Alman. And you know, just want to acknowledge that, you know, we hear the frustration, and you know, as Phil has noted in several of his communications, you know, we continue to learn from everything that's taking place on ECLRT. You know, to clarify, it is a completely separate project from this. ECLRT is its own project on its own timeline, and you know, everyone's aware of kind of the timeline they're working with in terms of testing and commissioning, and you know, more information will be available, you know, when it comes available in regards to ECLRT itself. You know, in regards to ECWE, you know, Metrolinx and the province continues to, you know, look at ways to expand transit in the region, and that includes thinking forward, thinking ahead, and that's what we're doing with ECWE. ECWE is already under construction. You know, we've already tunneled, you know, from Renforth going eastward, you know, and we're in active procurement for the remaining contracts, as we noted. So, you know, we continue to learn from ECLRT, and I'll give an example, as I noted earlier, that, you know, one of the reasons why for this project we've separated the contracts to several contractors is a major lesson learned from ECLRT. So again, just an example of how we're applying some of the lessons learned from ECLRT, but at the same time that team is working day and night to ensure that the ECLRT opens as soon as possible.
And I think I'll add, Abbas, sorry, and I live up at Eglinton for a long time, and have driven from and seen the impacts for the original project. And I think we have learned a lot, and Deanna is holding us all to it, in that we are also working to plant and to restore areas as soon as they're able to be restored, and areas that are adjacent to the project that are not in the footprint as soon as possible, so that you're not going to see those areas that just kind of are bare for years and years. I think we've learned a lot from that project restoration wise. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Abbas and Gretel. I see a hand up. I'd just like to remind you that if you do have a question, please submit it at www.metrolinks.com/ECWE_events. Okay, with that, I'll move to the next question. This one for you, Tennyson. How did Metrolinks assess any additional environmental impacts of the extension?
Yeah, so we have essentially a governing law that we abide by at Metrolinks for environmental assessments. It's called the Transit Project Assessment Process, or what we refer to as the TPAP. Really, we had the original Eglinton Crosstown LRT project publish an environmental assessment under this guiding document, and that was back in 2010. We then went back and we published in 2020 an amendment to that report, which really outlined the differences that we saw in the ECWE project from 2010 to 2020. So we prepared an environmental project report, as we call it, and we shared that around for public review. That was back in June 2020, and we do have a copy of that if anybody's interested to see the environmental assessments that we did as part of that study. It is posted on the project website, so I'm sure you'll provide a link to that as part of the slides. But as part of that process, we essentially established those studies outlining the differences, exploring the environmental impacts that were going to take place as part of the project, and looking at how we can mitigate those. So in addition to that, we did have that process include some consultation with the Ministry of Environment, and they reviewed everything and provided us an acceptance and an approval to proceed with the project and the accompanying changes. And that was back in August of 2020.
Thank you for that, Tennyson. Next question for you, Abbas. It's around transit-oriented development. Why is there no transit-oriented development at Jane Station?
Thanks, Amin. So the transit-oriented development program is, fully kind of pushed forward by the province of Ontario, and there is a kind of separate program running, in collaboration with Metrolinks in regards to the TOC program, and that is to have vibrant and mixed-use communities built around transit station. Of course, we want to make sure that they're considerate of local context, and stations are integrated to ensure the best customer experience. So we're happy to bring some of these comments received back to the government. But the province continues to work with the City of Toronto and York Region to identify various different opportunities, along transit stations across the Greater Toronto Area, and not just on ECWE. And there's a kind of rigorous evaluation process in regards to looking at how various properties are impacted by the subways program, looking at a bit of a detailed analysis of technical and economic viability to ensure that those particular sites are right for mixed use development. So we'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Next question. This is for Peter or Michal. Why can't the city parks like the golf course or soccer fields be reduced in size in order to keep habitat wider for wildlife?
A great question. It's a difficult question, and I think the obvious answer is that in a city like Toronto, where we have adjacent neighborhoods and a lot of people with a lot of different objectives and a lot of different aspirations for the design and use of open space, that we have to strike a balance. There is a very large community of people who embrace active sports and require facilities in order to undertake those activities. And there's also a very large community of people, probably like yourself, who cherish the natural environment and would like to see it expanded. I will say in the context of ECWE, Metrolinks has committed to not impacting any of the existing sports fields or athletic facilities at all. We obviously, all the work is being undertaken on the north side of Eglinton, so anything on the south side is, such as the golf course, is not being impacted at all. But the soccer pitches and the cricket pitches north of Eglinton will all be maintained in their current condition and will be maintained in use during construction. But that being said, we are optimizing the amount of land vegetation that we can restore wherever we can find it, and even looking for some additional sites beyond the construction zone that could be restored to a natural condition. And it's all about wildlife habitat and all about connectivity between various landscape zones in order to facilitate the movement of animals and wildlife. So we need a balance. Everybody has their own opinion about where that balance lies, but this is where we are. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Your next question for you, Michal. What measures are taken so that the portal at Scarlet doesn't flood?
That's a good question, actually. So I think there's a couple of things maybe just to note when we're answering that. So maybe just to kind of recap in terms of the question, Scarlet Portal is where the underground tunnels for that first contract start to daylight and the tunnels start to rise above the ground. So this is kind of where you're just coming out of the existing Eglinton Avenue. And then after you come out, you continue rising up above the ground and eventually get to the elevated station at Scarlet. So at that point where we start to go below existing ground, that's the portal. And the question is, what happens in a flood event there? First of all, is maybe just to consider it in terms of context. Eglinton Avenue itself, it's almost like a causeway or a very large and high embankment through this floodplain itself. So the river itself, which is probably the most likely source of flooding, it's almost 15 meters below Eglinton Avenue, so it's quite deep down into that ravine. And then the second thing to note is that the Scarlet Portal itself would have kind of a retaining wall around it, so that kind of stops flow kind of coming from the road inwards. And finally, also then at the low point of this portal, there's what's called sump pumps, which is basically like a large chamber or a concrete box in the ground. So in the event that flood water or water was to come in, it would go down the portal and then a series of pumps would kick in and put it back into the municipal system then.
Thank you, Michal.
You're welcome.
The next question. Will there be a way, excuse me, will there be a way to stay informed as construction progresses? I can take that one. So we are committed to having ongoing dialogue with the local community members throughout the course of the project. We will be setting up a construction or community liaison committee once the project moves further into the construction phase. In that area, we do already have one set up for the tunneling that's being completed currently between Renforth and Scarlet. So this usually provides a forum for regular dialogue between Metrolinx and community representatives. Those who are interested in receiving further updates can also follow the project on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Our handle is at Eglinton West EXT. And you can also access construction updates on the project website, or you can join our monthly virtual open houses as you're doing right now. We also have a monthly e-newsletter that you can sign up on our webpage. That's www.metrolinx.com/Eglinton West. Right, next question. Can this route be considered final? This one's for you, Abbas.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. So yeah, as noted, you know, the alignment we're currently moving forward with is the alignment that has been announced as part of 2019 as part of the subways program. So we are moving forward with this project as presented here at this open forum and since 2019. You know, this as noted, the project is currently under construction. We continue to tunnel our way from Renforth eastward, and we're already in active procurement. So you know we're focused on delivering this project as soon as possible for the community and to connect the city of Toronto to the city of Mississauga.
Okay, next question about safety for you, Mihal. How are you ensuring that the elevated guideway will be safe?
Oh, thanks, Aman. Yeah, I think, yeah, good questions. Probably, I guess in terms of safety, there's about maybe a number of aspects to consider, like kind of the structural design, and then also in terms of the systems and the redundancy that goes into that. Maybe just to note that this is, you know, quite a common structure. There's many examples around Toronto where elevated guideways are used, you know, for trains. And then also we also see other examples around Canada, ranging from Montreal to Vancouver and Edmonton as well too. So this is quite a common structure to, you know, for trains to run on. Then I think, you know, structurally, when we're doing it, we design to codes, and in terms of loadings, we always use an upper bound in terms of loading, and then in terms of material strength, a lower bound. So, you know, you're designing in quite a lot of kind of safety in from a structural point of view. And then I think, you know, in terms of a systems point of view, there's extensive testing goes into these systems and quite a lot of redundancy. So a lot of fail-safe mechanisms going in to make these systems really safe. And as I say, the testing and commissioning of these after everything is built is quite extensive and rigorous. Thanks, Aman.
Thank you, Mihal. Next question for you, Abbas. Have Indigenous communities and/or nations been consulted?
Thanks, Amin. Yeah, so you know, as Metrolinx is a crown agency of the province of Ontario, as part of our duty to consult, we're committed to building those positive and long-term relationships with Indigenous nations and Indigenous communities. So you know, we have actively been engaging with nations, Indigenous communities, the local community, on all aspects of our work that impact both Indigenous rights and interests, and that includes, you know, project and construction activities related to, you know, for example, the natural environment, natural heritage, and/or you know, archaeological potential. So you know, we continue to keep nations and the local communities engaged through various forums and opportunities, and you know, we want to emphasize that we value the input and the feedback. You know, it is a continuous learning process for all of us, and we're you know, actively, as I noted, engaging and consulting with nations and communities as the project continues to move forward.
Great, thank you, Abbas. We've got the next one for Gretel about trees. After planting new trees, will you check on them to make sure they don't die?
And I think we sort of talked about this a little bit already, but yes, I think we've actually learned a lot of lessons, and we've actually had a lot of questions from Indigenous nations about our current planting practices on other projects. So the answer is yes, we're going to take care of these plants, and we are committed to a in-depth monitoring program that includes watering, as discussed earlier, and that is a complex thing, and watering, maintaining, and warranty. So some trees are warranted for 2 years, some trees and shrubs are warranted for are protected for almost 5 years. There's invasive species management associated with that as well, so they're not outcompeted as they're growing and developing into mature plants. There's also herbivore protection that can be included with that. And so, yes, we are maintaining and taking care of them in some areas, and I will flag this where maybe there's a steep slope or there's restrictions for watering. those plants may be planted more densely so that we know that there will be some losses. And so that way, if we can't get to them to water because it's more impacted, they'll survive. We know that a certain percentage will survive and that they're not going to be maintained in that same way. And I will also say that in the ravine areas, in the natural areas you see, the city really proposes very dense plantings of 3 meter on center trees and 1.5 to 2 meter on center shrubs. So those plantings are dense already, and we know that they're, you know, that most of them will succeed with our healthy soils and all the other things we're going to add. Thanks.
Hey, and while I've got you, I've got a question here about tree compensation,
Okay.
which is
Um,
how will trees be compensated for?
So I think we had a slide to that earlier. There's many different ways that trees are compensated for. We have a vegetation guideline that we created to be transparent and to outline how we do that. In areas that are designated natural areas, we have what's called ecological compensation. And that ecological compensation, you know, as was shown for basal area, which is most of this project, is actually done by the area of the planting, the densities. I think they're going back to that slide. And Michael, if you want to jump in, we can go over that. But we also, so we do ecological compensation for designated natural areas, which is on the left-hand side of the slide. And then we also comply with all the tree bylaws. So if that's private trees, if that's city trees, most of those are compensated for 3 to 1. And our vegetation guideline compensates for things 1 to 1 and shrubs as well. So I hope that answers. And Michael, add something if you want. I think it was Michael whose slide this was. Or did I did a great job?
You did a fantastic job, Gretel, but maybe I can just add a little bit more there. So like you said, most of the project is based on the basal area compensation. In doing that basal area compensation, we really evaluate things not just based on is it natural or not. We actually go into the forest and we do studies to see how dense the woodlot is, and we provide appropriate compensation based on our studies that are done in depth in the woodlots themselves. But Dave, I saw you maybe want to come in.
No, exactly. Getting the density of the woody vegetation, we do prism sweeps, and then that dictates the ratio of compensation that comes out of that. So yeah, it could be for a woodland, it could be 3 to 1. If it's a really dense woodland, a lot of woody vegetation, it could be as high as 8 to 1.
Great, thank you. You can stay on, Dave. Next one's for you. Why can't you move trees to new locations instead of cutting them down?
Yeah, so we do get asked this time and again, and it is a good question. So there's a couple factors involved here. One, so some of the vegetation is not really suitable for moving. It's not in a good condition. If it's fair or in poor condition, it wouldn't be suitable. If it's a non-native invasive species, we wouldn't want to be moving that. In fact, the opposite, we want to control those. But for those species that may be suitable, there is size constraints. And so, small trees obviously would be easier to transplant than larger trees. But then there's the factor of timing. So when the disturbance is occurring, it's not necessary when we're going in and restoring those lands. So, this could work on a kind of smaller scale, where you have the timing works out, where you could take some small trees and shrubs and perhaps move them to another area of the park. But on a large scale, it doesn't work because of the timing, and then also cost effectiveness. It's a lot more expensive to take a transplant tree and move it as opposed to getting a tree from a nursery and planting it. That's just a reality.
Thank you, Dave. And the next question, is the project currently running on schedule, and can you provide information on the distance from Scarlet Road to the tunnel's location as of today? You can actually follow the TBMs for yourself on our website. We have a tunnel a tunnel boring machine tracker there that's updated weekly. So that's at www.metrolinx.com/Eglinton West. We've actually got also an open house on December 5th to provide a construction update for that part of the project. That's the tunnel from Renforth to Scarlett. That will be held December 5th at Father Sarah Catholic School, located at 111 Sunrow Drive, just northeast of the intersection, the Islington and Eglinton intersection, from 6:30 to 8 p.m. and that'll be in person. So hoping to see you all there. So let's see if we've got any more questions. Just give people a second to submit any other questions if they've got any. Now's your last chance. If you do have a question, please go to www.metrolinx.com/ECWE_events. Right, if not, we are approaching 8 p.m. Just want to take a moment to thank you for your interest and your great questions. If we didn't get to your questions tonight or you submit them after the event today, please know that your question is important to us and we will be posting the answers to all of the questions, including the ones that we've answered to our webpage in the next 2 weeks or so. There are many ways that you can continue to engage, including visiting our community office. The address and hours are on screen. Or you can give us a call or send us an email. Our contact information is also there at the bottom. Once again, thank you again for your participation tonight. We look forward to meeting with you all again on December 5th. Have a great night.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.